So imagine you're just grinding through like 10,000 hours of deliberate practice.
Right, the classic grind.
Yeah, exactly. You're sacrificing your social life, your sleep, your weekends. You're just pushing through the friction every single day toward this one massive long-term goal. And then, just when you're on the verge of reaching it, you realize you have completely burned out.
Yeah.
Like there is absolutely nothing left in the tank.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's a huge problem. I mean, culturally, we totally idolize that grind, but the data actually tells a much more complicated story about what it takes to, sustain high performance.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, and a very special welcome to all of you gratitude spreaders listening right now.
Yes.
You guys know who you are. You're the ones out there actively working to make your corners of the world brighter, building communities, lifting people up. And today's debate gets right to the heart of what your community is all about.
It really does.
Because our mission today is to uncover the really complex and honestly sometimes controversial relationship between two massive concepts, grit and gratitude. Like, are they completely separate traits, or do they secretly rely on each other?
Well, the standard assumption is usually that they live in completely different psychological zip codes, right?
Right.
Like grit is always framed as this tough, relentless, forward-driving thing. And gratitude is viewed as kind of soft, maybe reflective, warm.
Yeah, one is pushing, one is resting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you start pulling apart the psychological literature we're looking at, researchers like Angela Duckworth and Robert Emmons, alongside the actual neurobiology of gratitude, that whole separation just completely falls apart.
Okay, but before we debate how they interact, we kind of need to establish what they actually are, right?
Right.
And to do that, we have to look at the critics of grit right out of the gate.
Oh, there are plenty of critics.
Yeah, so Angela Duckworth basically put the term on the map. Just for a quick refresher, she defines grit as passion and perseverance for long-term goals.
Right, and a key part of her framework is that it's totally malleable. It's not your IQ, it's not innate talent, it's built through that intense, deliberate practice.
So focusing on a weakness, giving 100% effort, constantly getting feedback.
Which, I mean, sounds great in a TED Talk.
Right, but the sources show some serious pushback.
Yeah, Marcus Creed conducted this massive meta-analysis on grit, and he basically threw a major wrench into the whole narrative.
What did he find?
His analysis suggests that the passion component of Duckworth's definition is statistically way overstated. When you look at the hard numbers, grit mostly just boils down to perseverance of effort.
Okay, this is just trying hard.
Yeah, and fundamentally that makes it almost indistinguishable from a very old, well-established psychological concept, the Big Five personality trait of conscientiousness.
Right. Really? So critics are basically arguing that grit isn't some new psychological superpower.
Pretty much.
It's just rebranding conscientiousness, being organized and diligent, slapping a catchy label on it, and selling books.
That is exactly the academic burn Creed is delivering there. It's old wine in a new bottle.
Wow.
And the critiques don't even stop there. K. Anders Ericsson, another psychologist, points out this massive trap of circular logic in how we culturally use the word.
How so?
Well, we look at someone who made it to the top of their field and we say, oh, they succeeded, so they must have incredible grit. But when someone quits, we say they failed because they lacked grit.
Oh, I see. So it becomes a retroactive label, not an actual actionable metric.
Exactly. You can't measure it until the result is already in.
Which is actually really dangerous. Because if someone is struggling just to survive, telling them they just lack willpower completely ignores all the situational factors.
Absolutely.
Like critics from Education Week pointed out this huge blind spot. If you tell a disadvantaged student to just have more grit, you risk entirely ignoring the systemic barriers they're facing.
Right. Things like poverty, racism, or, chronically underfunded schools.
Exactly. It places the entire burden of overcoming structural inequality squarely onto some teenager's personal psychological willpower.
It's basically a culture of victim blaming under the guise of empowerment. So if we take all these critiques together, that it's just conscientiousness, the circular logic, ignoring environmental reality, a really clear picture emerges.
Sheer perseverance is just not enough.
No, it's not. Grinding away at a goal in total isolation without passion or support, it's just entirely unsustainable for the human brain.
Okay, so if pure grit is fundamentally flawed on its own, what actually fixes it?
Well, that brings us to the other half of our deep dive today.
The gratitude counterpart. Let's look at the neurobiology here because it's fascinating. What is actually happening in the physical brain when someone practices gratitude?
It is a profound neurological shift. Like, gratitude doesn't just make you feel warm and fuzzy, it actively alters the brain's reward circuitry.
Okay, yeah.
When you experience genuine appreciation, it activates the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, and the nucleus accumbens.
And those are the dopamine centers, right?
Exactly. They are absolutely rich in dopamine. And we usually think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but neurobiologically, it's the motivation and reward prediction chemical. It's what creates forward momentum.
So wait, gratitude is literally synthesizing the chemical required for motivation.
Precisely. It is fueling the drive. And at the exact same time, it stimulates the release of serotonin, which stabilizes your mood.
Wow.
And it actively downregulates the amygdala, so it drops the levels of the stress hormone cortisol in your bloodstream.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to kind of synthesize all this for the listeners.
Go for it.
If grit is the sheer horsepower of a car's engine, right, just pushing you forward toward that future goal,
Yeah.
then gratitude is the motor oil.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because without the oil, the engine can run for a little bit, but eventually it just overheats and completely destroys itself.
That captures the biological reality perfectly. Cortisol and stress are the intense heat building up in the engine during the pursuit of a hard goal. And the dopamine and serotonin from gratitude, that's the oil lubricating the system. You physically cannot sustain the horsepower of grit without the biological cooling process provided by gratitude.
Okay, so let's talk about how these two traits actually interact cognitively out in the real world.
Yeah, there's a really cool study from 2013 by Kleiman and colleagues, we found it in the Blaylock paper, that highlights the contrast in how these traits orient us in time.
Time orientation, what do you mean?
Well, grit is fundamentally internal and future-focused. You're looking months or years ahead to a specific outcome.
Right, the finish line.
Exactly. But gratitude is external and past or present focused. You're looking outside yourself, appreciating what has already happened or what is happening right in this exact second.
And that contrast is why they synergize so well.
Yes, because living entirely in the future, which pure grit basically demands, that creates chronic anxiety.
You're always chasing a horizon you haven't reached yet.
Right. And living entirely in the past can sometimes pull people toward rumination. But when you combine the future-driven engine of grit with the past and present anchoring of gratitude, you get this incredible psychological stability.
This actually lines up perfectly with Duckworth's later research. She found that truly gritty people, the ones who don't just burn out, they score incredibly high in gratitude, empathy, and kindness.
Because their ultimate motivation isn't just a massive paycheck.
No, it's this concept she calls mattering. They want their work to be profoundly useful to others.
And mattering is an external gratitude-based motivation. It gives you that constant feed of dopamine hits. When the future-focused drive of grit hits a wall, and it always does because ambitious goals are hard, the gratitude kicks in.
You look around, you appreciate the small wins, the team helping you.
Exactly, and that provides the oil so the engine can keep running toward the future.
So if we take this to its logical conclusion, is it possible that without gratitude, deliberate practice is literally just mindless suffering?
Duckworth basically asks that exact question. Can you become truly world-class by doing thousands of hours of difficult, painful practice without actually loving what you do?
Oh, what's the answer?
The data says no. If you don't have gratitude to reframe the friction, the stress of the practice will destroy your motivation way before you reach mastery.
But what happens when we move beyond just, like, deliberate practice? We're not just talking about trying to master the violin here.
Right.
What happens when this system is pushed to its absolute breaking point, like real-world stress or acute trauma?
This is where we have to look at the Blaylock study published in Psychiatry Research. It's heavy material, but it's crucial for understanding the power of this synergy.
What did they look at?
They looked at the relationship between negative life events and suicidal ideation in a cohort of college students over a 1-month period.
Why college students specifically? Just because they were accessible?
No, actually, it's because it's a massive high-stress transition period. It's a demographic where psychological pressure is immense, which makes it a very clear environment to study resilience and breaking points.
Okay, that makes sense. So what were they measuring?
How a person's baseline level of grit interacted with terrible life events to predict whether they would experience suicidal thoughts.
And the data revealed a pretty stark contrast.
Incredibly stark. For students who scored low in grit, the occurrence of negative life events strongly and predictably led to later suicidal ideation.
The psychological friction was just too much. The system broke down.
Exactly. But for individuals who scored high in grit, that relationship was weakened to non-significance.
Okay, wait, explain what non-significance means in this context, because that sounds huge.
It means the predictive relationship practically vanished.
Wow.
Yeah, grit acted as a buffer. The terrible life events still happened to these highly gritty students, and they still felt the pain, but the psychological cascade that usually leads to suicidal ideation was stopped in its tracks. High grit literally buffered their minds.
That is just astonishing, and it connects directly to Dr. Robert Emmons' research on what he calls grateful coping.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Emmons shows that grateful people are more resilient to trauma because gratitude reframes unpleasant events. It decreases their painful emotional impact.
Right, the gritty students in the Blaylock study were likely using a form of that grateful coping.
But hold on, I have to push back here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Telling someone who is actively suffering or dealing with trauma to just count their blessings. I mean, that sounds dangerously close to toxic positivity.
Oh, it really does.
It sounds totally dismissive.
Uh-huh.
How does Emmons' research avoid that trap?
It's a critical distinction, and Emmons is actually very clear about this. He completely rejects toxic positivity. He says explicitly that denying suffering or telling people to just count their blessings when they are in pain is not at all helpful.
Because it invalidates their reality.
Exactly. It causes more harm. Grateful coping is not a passive avoidance of the bad. It's a highly active, cognitively demanding task.
So how does it actually work?
You're forcing your prefrontal cortex to engage and make sense of the trauma. Emmons actually provides 4 specific reframing questions for this.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, what lessons did the experience teach me?
Okay. Second.
Second, can I find ways to be thankful for what happened even if I wasn't at the time it occurred?
Oof. That's a hard one to ask yourself in the moment.
Yes, it is really hard. Third, what surprising ability did this draw out of me? And fourth, how am I now more the person I want to be because of it?
Wow. Okay, so that is entirely different from just pasting a smile on your face and pretending everything is fine.
Exactly.
That requires you to stare directly at the pain, acknowledge it, and then do the grueling work of extracting value from it.
That is the motor oil, cooling the engine down.
Yeah.
You are forcing the neurological system to find meaning so it doesn't overheat.
But if reframing hard times requires this intricate balance of grit and gratitude, where does that balance actually come from? Culturally, we assume people are just supposed to magically do this inside their own heads.
Right. The whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing. It's one of the biggest misconceptions in Western culture. We are obsessed with the myth of the lone, gritty genius.
A person grinding away in a garage until they change the world.
Right, completely alone. But the research proves this is not a solo endeavor.
Let's bring in the Atlantis Press study on Indonesian college students. The researchers wanted to quantify what actually drives academic engagement.
Yeah, what keeps students locked in and succeeding despite the pressure.
And the data reveals a massive twist for our debate.
It really does. And the methodology is brilliant because they studied a more collectivist culture, which is a great counterpoint to our Western individualism.
Right. They measured personal grit against the impact of social support. So family, friends, lecturers.
They wanted to know which factor carried more weight, and the results showed that social support accounted for 21.2% of the variance in academic engagement.
While personal grit only accounted for 17.9%.
Exactly.
Which completely shatters the myth of the lone genius. Like, even if you have the most relentless personal grit on the planet, the social resources around you literally matter more to your success than your own willpower.
Duckworth's later research on organizational culture confirms this too. She points out that if you try to be gritty in a toxic culture, one that prioritizes raw talent and narcissism over humility, you will fail.
She says eventually the current takes you.
Yes. Grit is not developed and cannot be sustained in a vacuum. You can't grit it out alone.
So, to synthesize this whole debate, are grit and gratitude separate traits, or are they a package deal?
The science points to an unavoidable synthesis. Personal grit has to be combined with social support, and the bridge between those two things is gratitude.
Because gratitude is how we appreciate and actually utilize that support from others.
Exactly. When you combine internal drive, external support, and the gratitude to bind them together, it creates what Duckworth calls an aerodynamic pursuit of your goals.
Wow.
The highest form of grit absolutely requires the humility to accept help and the gratitude to value it.
That is a profound takeaway for all the gratitude spreaders listening today. To wrap up this deep dive, grit without gratitude is a trap. It's a recipe for burnout and toxic individualism.
It's running the engine with no oil.
Exactly. But together, they literally rewire our neurobiology. They reduce cortisol, spike dopamine, and create long-term resilience and happiness.
You biologically cannot have true grit without the fuel of gratitude.
And for all you gratitude spreaders out there, if you want to dive deeper into building these synergistic traits and sharing them with your communities, you need to visit spreadinggratitude.com. There are incredible resources there to help you do this exact work.
But before we officially sign off, I want to leave everyone with one final provocative thought based on the sources.
Lay it on us.
Duckworth frequently cites Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won a Nobel Prize. Well into his 80s, Kahneman was still passionately doing rigorous voluntary research.
Amazing.
Now, we know that gratitude physically strengthens the neural pathways for positive thinking through neuroplasticity. Your brain actually changes shape. And we know that grit is completely malleable regardless of age. So, knowing all that, is there ever a time or a date stamp on when we have to stop redefining our own potential? If your brain can always rewire itself to find meaning and grit is just a habit you can build, then the limit isn't dictated by your age. It's entirely up to you.
I absolutely love that. There is no expiration date on your potential as long as you have the grit to push forward and the gratitude to keep the engine running. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep spreading that gratitude, and we will catch you next time.